everybody. Hi, sociology class. How are you today? Coming to you from my wonderful parents' backyard in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm staying throughout what is now quarantine. I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody's good. As a reminder, always, if there's anything you need from me, you know where to find me. You can email me in D2L, or you can send me an instant message that way too. If you haven't, just a couple things before we get started with the presentation today. If you haven't already, make sure that you are functional in D2L if you have a smartphone, get the app from Brightspace. I think that's the exact name that you look for in the App Store. I don't know about Google Play because I use Apple, but I'm pretty sure it's the same there as well. If you search for Brightspace, you can find the app that corresponds to D2L, so you can have it on your phone as opposed to having to log into a computer every time you want to look at it. And I find it helpful because it also gives me real-time notifications for whenever something is coming through. So you'll see all of my announcements as they happen. So that's one thing. The second thing is, because I'm going to put all of these on YouTube, it may serve you best to subscribe to YouTube, this channel, just to get the notifications that way as well. So if you are subscribed to my channel, you will automatically get a notification when this is uploaded and available for you. So there you go. So that's all the housekeeping I have today. As we discussed last time, I'm going to talk about crime and how crime relates to the conversation of deviance that we've been having and why it's important to talk about it. So I hope you're ready. This is not nearly as long a presentation as the last one. And it's going to set us up for watching 13th, which will happen tomorrow. And I'm going to include the link to the movie in everywhere, but it's in the description box below. You can use that link and find it. So I know that I told you that was part of your deal. You don't have to look that far. Just make sure you're able to access it and stream it. We'll be doing that for both class periods next week, along with the corresponding written assignments. Just as a reminder, this video and every video I put up will be followed by a writing kind of assignment. They're under quizzes in D2L. It is not a huge tax on your time, I don't think. So make sure you go there. All of these quizzes that are associated with these videos have to be completed in order for you to get credit for this class, whether or not you choose to opt over to the pass-fail, or whether you're going ahead with getting an actual grade for this class. So make sure that you are doing those. They don't have due dates per se, but they are not hard to do. It should take maybe half an hour tops. And just do it while it's on the top of your mind. Just do it. Go over there right now. Do it. Well, watch this first, then go there. Okay? So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Hi, sociology class. How are you today? Coming to you from my wonderful parents' backyard in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm staying throughout what is now quarantine. I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody's good. As a reminder, always, if there's anything you need from me, you know where to find me. You can email me in D2L, or you can send me an instant message that way too. If you haven't, just a couple things before we get started with the presentation today. If you haven't already, make sure that you are functional in D2L if you have a smartphone, get the app from Brightspace. I think that's the exact name that you look for in the App Store. I don't know about Google Play because I use Apple, but I'm pretty sure it's the same there as well. If you search for Brightspace, you can find the app that corresponds to D2L, so you can have it on your phone as opposed to having to log into a computer every time you want to look at it. And I find it helpful because it also gives me real-time notifications for whenever something is coming through. So you'll see all of my announcements as they happen. So that's one thing. The second thing is, because I'm going to put all of these on YouTube, it may serve you best to subscribe to YouTube, this channel, just to get the notifications that way as well. So if you are subscribed to my channel, you will automatically get a notification when this is uploaded and available for you. So there you go. So that's all the housekeeping I have today. As we discussed last time, we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about crime, and how crime relates to the conversation of deviance that we've been having and why it's important to talk about it. So I hope you're ready. This is not nearly as long a presentation as the last one. So, and it's going to set us up for watching 13th, which will happen tomorrow. And I'm going to include the link to the movie in everywhere, but it's in the description box below. You can use that link and find it. So I know that I told you that was part of your deal. You don't have to look that far. Just make sure you're able to access it and stream it. We'll be doing that for both class periods next week, along with the corresponding written assignments. Just as a reminder, this video and every video I put up will be followed by a writing kind of assignment. They're under quizzes in D2L. It is not a huge tax on your time, I don't think. So make sure you go there. All of these quizzes that are associated with these videos have to be completed in order for you to get credit for this class, whether or not you choose to opt over to the pass-fail, or whether you're going ahead with getting an actual grade for this class. So make sure that you are doing those. They don't have due dates per se, but they are not hard to do. It should take maybe half an hour tops. And just do it while it's on the top of your mind. Just do it. Go over there right now. Do it. Well, watch this first, then go there. Okay? So, without further ado, let's get into it. The major difference between crime and deviance, it's actually not a difference. Crime is a form of deviance. As we said in the last section, deviance is any behavior, activity, trait that challenges a norm. Crime becomes a special category for study, for sociology, for being a part of life for everybody, because it is institutional. So we take deviance, the concept of deviance, and then say, as a society, what do we really need in order to preserve the order and the social cohesion that we're working for as a group. And what will happen is, over time, pretty much every society decides that laws are an important part of civilized life. And laws are just formalized norms, so they're written down. So while all crime is a form of deviance, not all deviance is a form of crime. In order for crime to be what it is, it needs to be within the context of a system designed to patrol and prevent deviant behavior that goes against written laws. So I'm offering you quotes right here that kind of, for me, embody a little bit of what the difference is. So you can kind of see the one on the left really pertains to deviance. That is to narrow the definitions of what is normal, and the reduction of difference to deviance. So anything that becomes different is deviance. On the other hand, crime is an enterprise of the state, of civilized society, meaning that they have taken all of whoever they is in a given society, they've taken those ideas, written them down, and made them expressly prohibited. And the policing of that prohibitions of certain activities is what we call crime. So you can see here, we have the lists on each side that kind of, and it's so basic, really. Thankfully, there's not much to say about this. You can have deviance that isn't crime. The consequences can still be severe, but criminal deviance, the consequences are stated. They're often known before anybody enters into crime, and they're enforceable by law, whatever that means. And in crime, when we're talking about crime or the criminalization of things, the enforcement for that is always police, if we're talking about civil society. In other institutions, it would be something similar to the police. So if you take Oakton as an example, there are formal laws at Oakton that govern the behavior of students and of staff, and they are enforced by security, or whoever security reports to. So it's the difference between informal and formal. Informal is deviance, and when it becomes formal, now you're talking about crime. So in order to talk about crime, we then begin analyzing the criminal justice systems that exist. These, as you may know, some of you, all of us maybe, have experiences of criminal justice system in this country. If you know a police officer, then you know probably more of the internal workings of the police than just an everyday citizen does. But we all drive around or walk around and can see the police in action. We see what they do because of news. We are aware of their presence, and it is expressly known their purpose. The other components, though, of the criminal justice system include all of the officers of law, which would include judges, attorneys, especially those that work for the state, anybody so that's prosecutors, anybody whose job exists because of the criminal, states, anybody whose job exists because it's a response to the criminal justice system. So pretty much any attorney exists as part of the criminal justice system, whether or not they're representing offenders or whether they're representing the state. So it can be very complicated. And as this shows up in here, I wanted to show a model of a criminal justice system because we very often don't think of it this way. So I found this from, let me see, so this is from the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice. This was in 1967, although I don't think that things are terribly different now. Maybe some of the ways we interpret things are different. But if you look at this visual that's in front of you, this is a really good, to me, representation of the criminal justice system because it starts with crime and it's like a choose your own adventure crime style. Look at all of the ways that you can go based on what's going to happen in that system. This model to me is important in a sociological perspective because it shows how clearly delineated and formal these things are. This is a system map. It's a process map. And so that means that the criminal justice system that you're dealing with, that this particular visual kind of enlightens us about, is very detailed. And at every step in this visual, There are people along the chain who exist to keep that chain moving. So what a lot of people like to assume is once you're in the system, you're kind of going to get kicked out of the system in some point. That's true, but let's remember that at every step where there are people involved, which would be every single step from the minute a behavior is considered breaking law, which would be where crime, the crime bar on the left side starts us off with, there are people in each of these stops along the path that preserve that system. So crime is different from deviance in that it is institutionalized, meaning you're dealing with an entire system of people set up to preserve the rules and the order of society as well. And this is why when we talk about crime, whenever you're talking about a system, we have to start taking a critical look at the system itself. Because what happens to individual people in the system can vary widely based on personality and personal traits, as we kind of know. But this map to me was a great example of how crime is different from deviance, because what my question to you would be to draw a deviance map. I think it would be way smaller and a lot less stops on the map itself. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because really this is the project for criminology, and this is not a criminology course. But if you are considering going into law enforcement or the criminal justice system, a profession therein, you definitely want to get yourself into a criminology course because you will spend 10 to 12 weeks talking about all of the particularities of that system and all of the reasons that their perspective and their standpoint exists as it does. So you'll kind of take a entire course dedicated to talking about laws, but not necessarily from the legal perspective, from the enforcement perspective. And that's very important for people whose jobs are intended to prevent crime. And remember, while we talk about crime, the whole purpose of the criminal justice system is to uphold the laws of whatever given society you're talking about. And let's remember that the reason we want to do that is in order to preserve a sense of shared values, shared beliefs, and ultimately to make that place, whatever those are based on, as safe and, well, in some cases it's safe, but it's to make life in that large society livable for people. So there is inherently an order to talking about any criminal justice system. The perspective from the people in the system is always we are protecting the liberty of people by making sure that some people are not working to break the society by essentially challenging those rules of civil life too far so that it starts to break down the social bonds. So we do, in order to understand both sides of the system, we have to understand and remember why it exists in the first place. So anybody who is in criminal justice professions generally believes it's their purpose to protect society from those who want to break it down. Now, if we have an experience of the criminal justice system as someone, as an offender, as someone who has now been identified as trying to break down the society by breaking the law, we have a different perspective on that system. And that's where we start to see some of the problems with the criminal justice system. I think we can all agree that both perspectives are valid. There is a purpose for the system. There is a consequence of the system. And both sides of those, it's a very different experience to be a police officer or to be someone apprehended by a police officer. Those can't be reconciled, really. They're always going to come from two different perspectives. So the goal for sociology is not to point the finger at anybody, not to claim that someone isn't doing their job or should be doing it differently, but the goal of sociology is to examine what happens within the criminal justice system as it applies to people and their lives, right? So we want to examine both the process, how do they enter the system, what happens to them once they're in, and what factors determine what happens once they're in. And also, I think more so criminology, but also sociology, we want to understand the perspective of those who are trying to enforce the laws. What seem to be the issues related to people breaking the laws? Why are they breaking the laws? Who tends to be breaking the laws? Those are the questions that we want to know. The issue, though, is that when a system begins to work incorrectly, or I should say, we begin to find inherent inequality in the system, that's when we have to stop ourselves and review whether or not the system is working for all people. And the issue with the criminal justice system today that we know is that it's not necessarily working for all people. So I decided, since criminology and the area of crime, the discussion of crime, is full of data, I decided it was time for us to look at some real data. So remember, and I think we all know this, the book may mention it, but there's all kinds of different crimes that are identified in what is called the Uniform Crime Report. This is a report that officers fill out as people are being arrested for crimes. And they range, as we know, all the way from murder, all the way down to petty theft, shoplifting, other like misdemeanors, all the way down to parking tickets, really. Except that you wouldn't really find parking tickets in the Uniform Crime Report. Those are usually person-to-person arrests. So fines and like municipal stuff, right? If you get a parking ticket, technically it's probably a police officer writing it up, but they treat it differently in the system because it's not as important as the felonies are in terms of figuring out what to do with people. So we have here, I think this is fascinating. We have here the homicide rate in the U.S. for the past 18 years. And as we read, you can see there's two axes here. The horizontal one is the years. The vertical one is a rate. It's the number of homicides per 100,000 people. If you want to think hard about what that means, you can. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time here doing that because why? But this is for the U.S. It just explains how you get your 10-point scale over there. What's the general trend that you're seeing here? What I'm seeing is that when we start in the 90s and homicide is a violent crime, what we see right away is that it started pretty high. If you have your scale being a 10, we were at it in, it looks like about 1992. Over the past 18 years, though, what do you see? You see a slope that kind of happened starting somewhere around 1994, and the slope continues all the way to the year 2000. So if we look at those years, we have to think about what was going on in those years. We see one presidential administration kind of in the midst of this. It should be noted that crime in the U.S. went up very sharply in the 1980s because of the war on drugs. So we started prosecuting drugs a lot more. You start to see a lot more violent violent crime related to drugs in that same time. So in this time period, we're starting at the height of that in 1990. So there's a natural drop that occurs when the administrations change. Obviously, 92, I think, was Clinton at that point. And so you see a drop in crime up until about 2000, which does cover a couple, well, yeah, it's mostly the Clinton years, honestly, right there. And we need to ask some questions about why. On the screen, maybe I'll try to offer some examples. I don't know them off the top of my head right at this very second that I'm talking. But I'll give you some maybe explanations for why we might see a drop there. Interestingly, though, from 2000 to 2018, what you see is either a flat or, starting in 2008, a drop down again, very shallow compared to the first one, a little spike in 2016, and then you see it going down again. Generally, the trend in the United States is that homicides are going down, no matter where it is. Urban, rural areas, that's what's happening. So that's good, we think. The question, though, is why is it going down and what might be contributing to that? And I want to show you another graph that I found here. What we're looking at here is the incarceration rate. Now, this is over a much bigger time span. This is from 1925 all the way to 2015. So it's a long time they're talking about. Thankfully, though, we do cover the same years that we were talking about in the last graph. And what do we see? We see that in 1990, we are on a huge upswing of incarceration that continues all the way through to 2010, and then we start to see a drop off. These two particular pieces of information together are interesting. So at the same time that you're seeing a big drop in homicides, which is generally the gold standard statistic for talking about violent crimes, you see a super sharp rise in incarceration at that same time period. So what is going on? What we know about this time is we saw a huge rise in drug-related crimes, any crimes that would be considered non-violent, really. So drug-related, white-collar crimes, different category of crime, property, theft, things like that. So these two pieces of information together are kind of interesting, and they're kind of contradictory, especially when we know the next piece of this story, which is that incarceration for Black Americans has continued to skyrocket over decades. So the question really is now, it's good that homicides are going down, but the majority of those incarcerations that make up that big slope in that data refer to particular race categories, and that is a problem for the system. I'm offering here a quote from Michelle Alexander. There's been some excellent scholarship done around examining this issue regarding racial discrimination and the criminal justice system, really within the past 10 years, but very recently, some big heavy hitters have come out, and I really liked, her book is The New Jim Crow, which is quoted underneath her name. I really like this particular quote in thinking about who is being incarcerated and for what and why. So she brings up the question of whether or not the criminal justice system now exists to prevent crime or to control a certain group of people. It's an incredibly important question. If we are finding that a social institution has become so biased or discriminatory toward one group over another, then we have to start asking why that's happening and what the effects of that are. And I can tell you, it's not great. So I wanted to find some other data around this race issue and crime, because all of the research around crime very recently has really, thankfully, started taking on a much more interdisciplinary approach, an intersectional approach, meaning that now we're not just considering whether it's more men than women or more blacks than whites, but we're looking at the whole picture of race, class, and gender when we're examining who is entering into the criminal justice system. What we have here, I think, is a very interesting story we're being told. So this all comes from the Pew Research Center. You can see it's fairly recent, 2018. And we have here kind of they're juxtaposing. Now, we're not in the system, we're in the neighborhoods now, and they're asking people about their concerns about violent crimes, their concerns about different kinds of crimes. So let's look and see what we have. We have 82% of adults who were surveyed, who were black, said that they believe that gun violence is a very big problem in the country today, compared to 47% white. That's almost 2 times as many black respondents who are saying that gun violence is a problem. And we have somewhat of a similar number, although a little bit lower, when we talk about violent crime, which doesn't have to refer to specifically gun violence. Other violent crime would include any other kinds of like personal violence. So generally speaking, the black Americans that were surveyed definitely believe that the violent crime and gun violence are much more present to them than the white respondents. If we go to the next piece of data, we see that there is also a general perception, it's pretty high on both race categories, but more than 8 out of 10, 84% of black respondents believe that blacks are treated less fairly than whites by the police and the criminal justice system. So you can see the breakout of police is the first line in dealing with the criminal justice system. Quite honestly, that 87%, it's so close to 9 out of 10. Almost all of the respondents who are black said that they perceive that the criminal justice system is discriminatory toward them, toward other blacks in the country. And the police don't fare much better. So what is the story that this data is telling us? It's telling us that the black Americans who were surveyed not only believe and see that there is more violence in their communities, but they also feel that they are treated less fairly by police and the criminal justice system. So what is this telling us? It's telling us that we have a real problem because it means they feel like they have nowhere to turn that won't discriminate against them when it comes to reporting crime in their neighborhoods. So that's one big issue. I found this to be interesting. These don't necessarily follow one from the other, but I found it very interesting, this piece of data that talks about being in favor of allowing prior convicted felons to vote after serving their sentences. So in case you didn't know, when someone is convicted of a felony, they lose their right to vote. There has been some legal action over a long amount of time to get that turned around. Why might we want that to be turned around? Well, if we start considering all of the things we've been talking about so far, we can see that the consequences of a system that may discriminate among race and the perception of a system that discriminates against race means that Black Americans are becoming more and more disenfranchised in their own communities. If that's the case, and they also are going to disproportionately experience not being able to vote because more and more of them are convicted of felonies, now they're losing their voice as American citizens. And that's why the book by Michelle Alexander is called The New Jim Crow, because what she's arguing in that book is that the criminal justice system is just another form of slavery now. So it's not the same obvious conditions of slavery from back in the Civil War era. But if you don't have the right to vote, if you have to live in scary communities, and if you're afraid of reporting that violence for fear of being treated discriminatorily when you report it, how is that not slavery? How is that freedom, actually, is the question. And I think it kind of makes sense to ask that question based on the data that we have. So look at who, it should not be a shock, but look at who is in favor of allowing people of convicted felonies the right to vote. Actually, on this one, everybody seems to agree much more clearly. So if you consider the entire sample, it's almost 2.5 to 1, really, the ratio of adults who believe that they favor that. The white line mirrors that almost exactly. But look at the disproportional amount of Blacks that feel like they strongly support that. Not surprising. If they're starting to feel like their freedom is being infringed upon, and not just starting to feel, most people in the race and crime area know that this is a decades long. It's a continuation. It's a part of the original civil rights movement. And the fact that in 2018 we're still asking this question means that that movement is not as far along as maybe we hoped that it would be. All right. I've got you some other numbers because I want to continue to fill out this story a little bit. When we talk about a disproportionate amount of Black and Hispanic or Latinos in this country who are imprisoned, here are the numbers that make the case for that. So in 2014, out of a 6.8 million prison population, so that's across the country, 6.8 million people were in prison in 2014. Over 1/3, 34%, were African Americans. That is a high percentage. It doesn't look that high until you see this number. So in order to compare the total population, you really can't compare apples to oranges to bananas because there are more white people in the country than there are Black people or Hispanic Latino people. And so when you see this stat, it really drives it home. So 5 to 1. This is the rate at which African Americans, men and women, are incarcerated compared to their white peers. So Black Americans are 5 times more likely in 2014, that number has not gone down, to be incarcerated. This is why it's incredibly important to start asking questions about the criminal justice system. And it leads us to all of those questions that we were asking when we were talking about deviance originally. Some would want to say that there's something inherent to Black Americans that make them more likely to commit crimes. That perspective really places the legitimacy with the system and says the system does a good job determining who is deviant and who isn't, who's breaking the law and who isn't. And it lies with the individuals or these characteristics that must drive that behavior. Instead, a stat like this makes us start to ask questions about the process of the system, especially knowing what we know about the perceptions, both of white and of Black Americans, that agree that there is the belief and the experienced reality of discrimination when it comes to dealing with police and with the criminal justice system. So the case is starting to rack up a little bit that the criminal justice system is maybe not as legitimate as we want it to be in assessing who is committing a crime and then dealing with them in a way that is appropriate and not discriminatory. If you're not convinced yet, I've got a series of these numbers just for you to consider. All right, we've got 56% versus 36%. The 56% is the percent of prison populations that are Hispanic, Latino, and African American versus the 36%, which is the total group of the American population that those two race and ethnic categories make up. So, prison populations that are Hispanic and Latino, 56%. That's in the prisons. But in the country, those two groups only make up 36%. So this number we have to interpret as telling us that those two race and ethnic groups are overrepresented in the prison population, meaning that they find themselves in prison almost twice as much as their white peers do, or they make up population to population. So it's not twice as much, but it's twice as many of their population are in prison than compared to the white population in America. All right, guys, I hope that's as far as I'm going to take the discussion of criminology and crime today. The hard thing about this topic, as I've said with every other topic we've talked about, is that there's so much material to cover. We're really skimming the surface. And so even though it feels a little short, a little brief, surface, I agree. That's how it feels for me talking about it. I want to spend, 7 more hours talking about criminology, but I won't and I can't. So if you are interested in these topics, go ahead and send me an email. Actually, write a comment in the comments below, and that's something that I want to start using. So if you have a thought, an idea about what you've seen here today, if there's a topic that you want me to dive further into with maybe a little bonus video, I am happy to do that. But you have to write it in the comments on this video. So let me know and I'll respond to that. And I will also take into account the fact that you are posting and going a little bit out of your way to give me some immediate feedback on these videos. I think it's fair. I don't think that's a bad thing. So with that, make sure that you check out and check for me to make sure this link to the movie for next week is functional and that you can access it. You probably do need a fair amount of streaming capability in order to watch the movie. It is online. If you are having trouble with that, let me know and I'll try to help problem solve that. Otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing you. I am going to hold virtual office hours on Monday. I don't know what time works. I'm going to say 10 a.m. Central Time. I'll hop onto Zoom. I'll give you the link to that in D2L. If you want to stop in and say hi, if you want to just chill and chat, that's fine. If you want to give me updates on how the shelter in place is going for you, whatever you want, I will be around from 10 to 11 Central Time on Monday. And I'll put that reminder in D2L as well. So with that, I hope you enjoyed enough, that you can enjoy these things. And the next one will be after the movie. Maybe I'll do a couple little bonus videos regarding the movie and what to watch for. If those post, I'll let you know. But the next scheduled video will be after next week, once we work our way through the movie. I think we are scheduled to talk about social institutions, but don't quote me on that. I'll get back to you. Otherwise, have a good weekend. If it feels like a weekend. It doesn't to me. Every day feels exactly the same. But have some good time at the end of your week. First and foremost, please make sure you're following the guidelines for staying at home and protecting others around you. As we all know now, this is not about us necessarily, not about you. It's about your older relatives, parents, friends who may be at a much bigger risk for some serious consequences of getting COVID-19. So please stay at home, wash your hands, be cool. We'll see you next time. Have a good one. Total brain fart. Anybody whose job exists because it's a response to the